Kira Vasquez was 11 years old, and she was terrified. But nobody would ever know that, because she had learned a long time ago how to keep her face perfectly still. The shuttle docked with a metallic groan, and the doors slid open to reveal Station Valar 9, the largest educational outpost in the Galactic Union, and home to the Academy, where the children of the most powerful species in the galaxy came to learn and grow and prove themselves worthy of their bloodlines. Kira was none of those things. She was the daughter of a junior diplomatic attaché from Earth, a planet that most species in the Union had barely heard of, and the ones who had heard of it usually laughed about it. Her mother had knelt in front of her that morning and held her face in both hands and said, "You are going to walk in there, and you are going to be brave, and you are going to show them what humans are made of." And Kira had nodded, because that was what you did when your mother looked at you. Like that. Even when your stomach was full of ice and your hands were shaking inside your pockets. The Academy halls were enormous. Everything on this station was built for species much larger than humans, and Kira felt like an ant walking through a cathedral as she followed the illuminated guide strip on the floor toward Classroom 7 Gamma, her assigned cohort room for the next academic cycle. She passed students in the corridors, and every single one of them was terrifying in a way that made her chest tight. There were Durrani children who stood nearly 3 meters tall, even at juvenile age, with 6 powerful limbs and scales that looked like polished granite, and tails that could crack steel plating if they swung hard enough. There were Vraxel students who moved on clicking segmented legs, their bodies covered in dark chitinous armor, and their mandibles dripping with venom glands that pulsed faintly green in the artificial light. There were Thesic younglings who floated in their mobility spheres, their translucent cephalopod bodies rippling with bioluminescence, their psychic fields brushing against her mind like cold fingers trailing across the back of her neck. And then there was Kira. Small and soft-skinned, with dark brown eyes and dark brown hair, pulled back in a simple ponytail, and a Regulation Academy uniform that was slightly too big for her, because they did not make them in human sizes yet. She found Classroom 7 Gamma and she walked inside, and every conversation stopped at once. 26 alien students turned to look at her, and the silence was so heavy she could feel it pressing against her eardrums. Professor Ulan, a senior Thesic with 6 unblinking eyes arranged in a crown around their bulbous head, hovered at the front of the room inside a large mobility sphere filled with a pale blue liquid. "Ah," Ulan said, and the translator embedded behind Kira's ear converted the psychic vibration into flat synthetic English. "You must be the human child, the new addition to our cohort. Please come forward." Kira walked to the front of the room, and she could feel every eye and every sensor and every psychic tendril in that room, studying her like she was a specimen in a jar. "Class," Ulan continued, "this is Kira Vasquez, of Earth, a Category 12 soft-tissue species recently admitted to the Galactic Union. She will be joining us for the remainder of the cycle. Please make her feel welcome." Category 12. Kira knew what that meant, because she had looked it up before she came. The Galactic Union classified species by their natural biological capabilities on a scale from 1 to 20, with 1 being the most dangerous apex predators, and 20 being organisms that could barely survive their own environments. Category 12 meant soft, vulnerable, unremarkable, possessing no natural armor, and no venom, and no psychic ability, and no redundant organ systems. Category 12 meant prey. A sound came from the middle of the room, a sharp clicking rattle that Kira would soon learn was Vraxel laughter. It came from a student named Chict, who sat surrounded by a cluster of other Vraxel, their mandibles clacking together in amusement. "Category 12, Chict said, the translator rendering the words in a high, mocking tone. "I did not know they allowed food animals to enroll." The room erupted. Durrani students rumbled with deep, vibrating laughter that Kira could feel in her bones, and Thesic students pulsed with bright flashes of color that their species used to express humor. and even the quieter species in the back rows shifted and rustled with amusement. Kira stood at the front of the room, and she let it wash over her like a wave, and she did not cry, and she did not flinch, and she did not look at the floor. She looked at Chick with those sharp brown eyes, and she said nothing at all, and then she walked to the only empty seat in the room, which was at the very back corner, where nobody wanted to sit because it was next to the waste recycler vent. She sat down, and she opened her datapad, and she began taking notes. The days that followed were not easier. Gorath, the largest Durrani student in the cohort, made a habit of accidentally sweeping his massive tail across Kira's workstation every time he passed, sending her materials clattering to the floor. The Thesic students excluded her from study groups by communicating in psychic frequencies she could not access, and when she asked to join, they simply said, "You would not understand. Your brain is too quiet." Chict was the worst of all, because Chict was clever about it. Chict never did anything that would show up on a behavioral report, but every day there was something new. A whispered joke about human bone density, a casual mention of how many seconds it would take Vraxil venom to stop a human heart, betting pool about how long before the soft thing requested a transfer. Kira endured it all. She ate lunch alone every day, sitting on a bench near the great viewport on level 7, where you could see the Andala Nebula stretching across the void like a river of purple and gold light. She studied harder than anyone in the cohort, and her test scores were consistently in the top 5, which seemed to make everyone angrier. And every night in her small quarters, she watched videos on her personal datapad, videos from Earth, videos of a creature she had loved since she was 5 years old. Then, one morning, Professor Ulan made an announcement that changed everything. "Next week," Ulan said, "we will hold our annual companion species presentation. Each student will bring a bonded animal from their homeworld to demonstrate the sacred relationship between your species and the creatures that shaped your evolution. Submission forms are due by end of day." Classroom buzzed with excitement, and for the first time in weeks, nobody was paying attention to Kira at all. Chict boasted loudly about the silk weaver that would be shipped from the Vraxil homeworld, and Gorath rumbled with pride about his family's stoneback drake. Kira filled out her form quietly and submitted it. That evening her datapad chimed with a message from Professor Ulan. It contained only one line. "Are you certain, child?" Kira typed back a single word. Yes. The companion species presentation was the most important cultural event in the Academy calendar, and every species in the Galactic Union took it very seriously. The idea was simple but ancient. Every intelligent species in the galaxy had evolved alongside other creatures on their homeworld, and the relationship between a people and the animals they bonded with said something deep and true about who they really were. The Vraxil bonded with silkweavers, enormous cooperative spiders the size of ground transports that could spin webs strong enough to trap armored vehicles and dissolve prey in digestive silk within seconds. The Durrani bonded with stoneback drakes, heavy reptilian beasts with hides like starship hulls that could shatter solid rock with a single blow of their tails, and carry a full squad of Durrani warriors into battle. The Thesic bonded with mineswimmers, psychic jellyfish from their deep oceans that could link dozens of minds together in a single, shared consciousness. These companion animals were not pets. They were living symbols of evolutionary triumph, proof that a species had risen to dominance on its world alongside creatures worthy of respect. And so when a student brought their companion to the academy, it was a source of enormous pride, a way of saying, "Look at what my world created, and look at how we mastered it." This is why nobody was paying attention to Kira Vasquez, because everyone knew that Earth had nothing worth presenting. The Union's public xenobiology database listed Earth's notable fauna with the kind of bored indifference usually reserved for filing minor customs violations. Dogs were classified as docile pack-bonded quadrupeds used for emotional regulation. Cats were listed as small solitary ambush predators, domesticated, negligible threat index. Horses were described as primitive quadrupedal transport, herbivorous, no natural weaponry of significance. Nothing on Earth registered above a threat level 3 on the Union's danger scale, and threat level 3 was the same rating they gave to ornamental garden slugs on the plebeian homeworld. So when Kira submitted her companion request, the system processed it without fanfare and routed it to the station's xenofauna clearance office, where a nervous plebeian bureaucrat named Togwit was responsible for approving all live animal transports. Togwit was a small amphibious creature about the size of a house cat, with enormous worried eyes and webbed fingers that were always slightly damp, and he approached every task with the desperate caution of someone who knew that one mistake would end his career. He pulled up Kira's request on his screen and read the species name aloud to himself in a quiet croak. Mellivora capensis, he said. Common name, honey badger. Homeworld, Earth. Mass approximately 11 kilograms. 11 kilograms. Laughed. The Durrani Drake coming for Gorath weighed 3,000 kilograms and required a reinforced containment bay and a dedicated security team. This thing weighed less than Togwit's lunch. He ran the standard clearance check, and the system returned an incomplete file with minimal data and a single behavioral flag that read, temperament, non-negotiable. Togwit blinked his enormous eyes at the screen and decided it was a data entry error because the rest of the file was so sparse that clearly nobody had bothered to do a proper assessment of such a small and insignificant creature. He stamped the approval and moved on to the next request, and he would regret this decision for the rest of his natural life. Meanwhile, in the academy corridors, the bullying had gotten worse. With presentation day approaching, the other students were eager to establish dominance, and Kira was the easiest target. Schicht cornered her in the corridor, outside the dining hall on the third day before the presentation, flanked by two other Vraxel students, whose names Kira had never bothered to learn. So, little human, Schicht clicked, mandibles spread wide in what passed for a Vraxel grin. What magnificent beast will you be bringing to shame us all? My silkweaver once cocooned a plebeian trade inspector in 3 seconds, one of the other Vraxel added. He was still screaming when they dissolved the silk an hour later. And Gorath's drake, Schicht continued, can shatter a stone wall with its tail. The ground shakes when it walks. I have seen the recordings. Schicht leaned closer, and Kira could smell the sharp acidic scent of Vraxel venom. What will you bring, soft thing? A small fluffy creature to cuddle and cry into when the real animals arrive? Kira looked at Schicht, and for the first time in weeks, she smiled. It was not a warm smile. It was not a friendly smile. Have made any human on Earth feel a sudden chill run down their spine, because it was the smile of someone who knew something that you did not. I guess you will have to wait and see, Kira said, and she walked away and left Schicht standing in the corridor with a strange, uncomfortable feeling that the Vraxel student could not quite identify. 4 days before the presentation, a Union transport shuttle docked at Station Velar 9's cargo bay, carrying 16 approved companion animals from across the galaxy. 15 of those animals arrived in massive containment units, with reinforced walls and energy barriers and dedicated life support systems and teams of professional handlers wearing protective gear. The 16th arrived in a crate roughly the size of a carry-on luggage case. The dock workers gathered around it in confusion. The crate was small and plain, and should have been completely unremarkable except for one detail that nobody could explain. Had more hazard warning labels on it than the Durrani Drake's containment unit. Red triangles and yellow caution strips and biohazard symbols covered every surface, and stamped across the top in bold standard galactic text was a message that read, "Live Terran fauna. Do not open without bonded handler present." And beneath that, handwritten in human script that the dock workers could not read, the Earth Consulate's xenobiology advisor had added a personal note. "We are not liable for what happens if you ignore the first warning." The head dock worker, a burly Durrani with 30 years of cargo experience, stared at the tiny crate, and then at the mountain of warnings covering it, and then back at the crate. Something inside the crate shifted, and a sound came out. It was not a roar, and it was not a hiss, and it was not a growl. It was a low, rattling snarl that contained absolutely no fear and absolutely no hesitation. "Dock worker in the bay, take one unconscious step backward." "What in the name of the first stars," the head dock worker whispered, "did the humans send us?" Nobody had an answer. They moved the crate to the companion holding area, and they put it in the far corner, away from everything else, and for the next 4 days, not a single worker went near it without being ordered to. Inside her quarters that night, Kira received a notification that her companion had arrived safely. She sat on her bed, and she pulled up an old video on her datapad, one she had watched 1,000 times. In the video, a small black and silver creature the size of a large house cat stood in the middle of an African grassland, facing a full-grown male lion that outweighed it by a factor of 50. The lion charged. The small creature did not run. It turned toward the lion and it snarled, and it puffed up its fur, and it charged right back at an animal that could have killed it. A single swipe. The lion stopped. The lion, king of its domain and apex predator of an entire continent, looked at this tiny screaming ball of fury running toward it, and it made a decision that evolution had never prepared it to make. It turned around and it walked away. Kira closed the video, and she set down her datapad, and she whispered into the quiet of her room, "4 more days, Sergeant." And somewhere in the cargo holding area, at the far end of the station, something small and angry and utterly fearless rattled the walls of its crate and waited. Presentation day arrived, and the grand hall of the academy was filled to capacity. The hall was an enormous amphitheater carved into the heart of Station Velar 9, with tiered seating that could hold over 1,000 spectators, and a central stage made of polished alloy that reflected the light from the massive viewport ceiling above. This was not just a school event. Diplomats had come from across the sector, because the companion species presentation was one of the oldest traditions in the Galactic Union, and the children presenting today were the sons and daughters of some of the most powerful families in known space. The Vraxil ambassador sat in the upper tier, clicking her mandibles with pride as she waited for Chick to present the family silkweaver. The Durrani military attaché occupied an entire reinforced section of seating, his massive frame barely contained by the structure, his eyes gleaming as he anticipated Gorath's Drake demonstration. Thessic delegation hovered in their mobility spheres near the front, their bioluminescence pulsing in slow rhythmic patterns of anticipation. And in the back row of the spectator section, almost invisible among the towering alien figures around her, sat Kira's mother, Elena Vasquez, junior attaché of the Earth diplomatic mission, wearing her best uniform and gripping her hands together so tightly her knuckles had turned white. The presentations were ordered by species seniority in the Union, which meant the oldest and most established species went first, and the newest members went last. Humanity had joined the Union 14 months ago. Kira would be the final presenter. She sat in the waiting area behind the stage, and she could hear every presentation through the thin walls, and each one made the knot in her stomach pull a little tighter. The Vraxil went first. Chick walked onto the stage with the silkweaver, and the audience gasped, because the creature was magnificent in the most terrifying way possible. A spider the size of a small vehicle, with legs like polished obsidian blades, and silk glands that glowed with a faint phosphorescent light. Schicht gave a command and the silk weaver spun a web between two stage pillars in under 4 seconds, a web so strong that when a test drone was launched into it, the drone was trapped instantly and dissolved into nothing within 30 seconds. The audience erupted in clicking applause and bioluminescent flashes of approval. Then came Gorath and the stoneback Drake. The Drake had to enter through the cargo doors because it was too large for the standard entrance, and when it walked, the entire amphitheater vibrated with each step. It was a beast of living stone and muscle, with armor plating that looked like it had been forged in a volcano, and a tail that ended in a club of solid bone the size of a ground transport. The reinforced demonstration block in the center of the stage, and the block which was made of compressed titanium alloy, shattered like glass. The Durrani section of the audience roared with approval, so loudly that several plebeian spectators had to activate their noise dampeners. The Thesic presented their mind swimmer, and the psychic jellyfish filled the entire hall with a wave of shared consciousness that made every person in the room feel a moment of perfect unity and peace. And the audience sat in stunned silence afterward, as if waking from a beautiful dream. One by one the species presented, and each companion was more impressive than the last, and each one reinforced the same message that had been repeated across the galaxy for thousands of years. The greatest species bond with the greatest creatures. And then it was time for the humans. A silence fell over the hall that was different from all the silences before it. This was not a silence of anticipation. This was the silence of an audience preparing to be amused. Schicht leaned over to a nearby Vraxel student and said in a voice just loud enough to carry, "I wonder if it will be a small, fluffy dog that does tricks." Laughter rippled through the nearby seats. Kira walked out onto the stage. She was so small compared to every other presenter that the stage lights seemed to swallow her, and she looked for a moment like a child who had wandered into the wrong room. She carried the small crate, and she set it on the stage floor, and the audience leaned forward with the eager curiosity of people who expected to be entertained by something pathetic. "My name is Kira Vasquez," she said, and her voice was steady and clear, and carried perfectly through the hall's acoustic system. "I am from Earth, and this is my companion." She opened the crate. Out walked the honey badger. Sergeant emerged with a rolling, confident waddle, his stocky body covered in coarse black fur, with a silver-white stripe running from his head down his back. He was barely knee-high to Kira. He weighed 11 kilograms. He looked around the grand hall of the Galactic Union Academy, at the 1,000 alien spectators, and the gleaming stage, and the massive viewport showing the stars above, and his small dark eyes held an expression that the translator AI struggled with for a full 2 seconds, before settling on the closest approximation it could find: absolute indifference to everything alive. The laughter started immediately. It came from the Vraxil section first, Chick's mandibles clacking so hard they buzzed, and then it spread like a wave across the hall. The Durrani rumbled with amusement, and the Thesic pulsed with bright mocking colors, and even some of the faculty members suppressed smiles behind their appendages. This was the mighty companion of humanity. This small, squat, waddling creature looked like it had been assembled from spare parts and bad decisions. Sargent ignored all of it. He sniffed the air once, yawned widely enough to show a set of teeth that were surprisingly large for his size, and then he sat down next to Kira and leaned his weight against her leg as if the entire galaxy could collapse around him and he would not care enough to stand up. The laughter built and built, and Kira stood in the middle of it, and she did not flinch, and she did not explain, and she simply waited. And then something happened that stopped every sound in the hall. Professor Ulan rose from their seat. The senior Thesic elder, the most respected academic in the academy, The being whose psychic field was so controlled that students joked it could calm a supernova, rose from their mobility sphere platform with all 6 eyes locked on the small creature sitting beside the human child. And Ulan's psychic field, which every sensitive being in the room could feel like a background hum of warmth and calm, suddenly spiked with a single emotion so sharp and so raw that it hit every psychic-capable being in the audience like a physical blow. Fear. Pure, unfiltered fear. The laughter died, as if someone had cut its throat. Every head in the amphitheater turned to look at Professor Ulan, who was now standing rigid, their translucent body flushing dark purple, which was the thesic color of extreme alarm. "Professor," one of the faculty members said uncertainly, "is something wrong?" Ulan did not answer immediately. Instead, they moved to the presentation console, and with trembling tentacles, they entered an access code that Kira had never seen a teacher use before. A code that bypassed the standard educational database and accessed the Union Military Intelligence Xenobiology Archive, the classified one, the one that was compiled after first contact teams actually visited Earth and came back with data that had been immediately restricted. The screen behind Kira lit up with a file. At the top of the file was the species name, Mellivora capensis, and beside it was a threat classification that made the entire audience go silent, in a way that was no longer amusement, and was no longer curiosity, but was something much older and much deeper. The Durrani military attaché in the upper tier read the classification and stood up so fast his seat cracked. The Vraxel ambassador stopped clicking. Chikt's mandibles went completely still for the first time since Kira had known the Vraxel student. And Kira stood on stage, with Sergeant leaning against her leg, the small creature utterly unbothered by the sudden silence. And she allowed herself one small quiet smile. Because the file on the screen read, Species, Mellivora capensis, honey badger. Homeworld, Earth, Sol 3. Mass 9 to 14 kilograms. Union threat classification, revised, classified. Level 8. Drake, that had shattered titanium 10 minutes ago, was a level 7. The 11-kilogram creature sitting at the feet of an 11-year-old human girl outranked it. And the Grand Hall of the Galactic Union Academy was so quiet you could hear the stars burning. The silence held for exactly 6 seconds, and then the Grand Hall erupted into chaos. A dozen voices shouted at once, in languages that the translators struggled to keep up with, and the Durrani military attaché was on his feet, demanding to know why this classification had been restricted, and the Vraxial ambassador's mandibles were clicking so fast they sounded like a machine malfunction. Professor Ulan raised a tentacle, and the hall fell silent again, because when a Thesic elder commands silence, even generals obey. "I will read the file," Ulan said, and their voice carried the weight of someone who had just realized that the galaxy was not what they thought it was. "I will read it because every being in this room needs to hear what we have been too arrogant to learn." Ulan turned to the screen and began. Mellivora capensis, the honey badger, is a terrestrial mustelid native to multiple continents of Earth. It is classified as a Category 8 threat organism. The following behavioral and biological characteristics were documented by Union First Contact xenobiologists during the initial survey of Sol 3. The hall listened. The honey badger possesses a hide of extraordinary thickness and looseness. Predators that seize it in their jaws find they cannot gain effective purchase, because the creature can rotate freely inside its own skin and deliver retaliatory bites to the face and throat of any animal holding it. A murmur ran through the audience. The honey badger demonstrates near-complete immunity to neurotoxic venoms that would be lethal to organisms 50 times its body mass. It has been documented surviving the bites of cobras and mambas, snake species whose venom can kill large earth mammals in minutes. The honey badger is bitten, and it collapses, and it appears to die, and then approximately 2 hours later, it wakes up and continues what it was doing, as if nothing happened. Rumble, awe, the honey badger does not restrict its aggression to defensive encounters. It has been recorded attacking earth lions, leopards, hyenas, and packs of wild canids. Not in defensive territory or young, but in what our xenobiologists can only describe as acts of unprovoked aggression driven by what appears to be pure spite. Chicked made a small involuntary sound that the translator could not classify. The creature regularly raids the hives of earth bees, enduring hundreds of venomous stings simultaneously without any observable change in behavior or motivation. It consumes the honey and the larva and then moves on to the next hive. Furthermore, Ulan continued, and now the Thessic elder's voice had taken on a tone that Kira had never heard before, a tone of genuine bewilderment. The honey badger has been documented pursuing and driving away animals that outweigh it by a factor of 50 or more, through a strategy that our behavioral analysts have classified as psychological warfare, via relentless irrational aggression. Ulan paused and looked at the audience. It does not win these encounters through strength or speed. It wins because it refuses to stop. It wins because it does not care about pain or injury, or the fact that the creature it is attacking could kill it with a single blow. It simply continues attacking until the larger animal decides that the cost of this fight is not worth the trouble and retreats. The hall was so quiet that Kira could hear Sargent breathing against her leg, slow and unbothered. Our analysts asked the human delegation how they classified this animal. Ulan said, and the humans laughed and said it was considered by their people to be, and I quote, nature's most fearless creature, and the animal that simply does not care. Ulan closed the file and turned to face the audience, and what happened next would be talked about in the academy for the next 100 years. Years. But this, Ulan said, this is not what frightens me. The Durrani military attaché leaned forward. What frightens me, Ulan said, is what else that planet produced. Ulan opened a second file, and then a third, and then a fourth, and the screen behind Kira began filling with images and data that made the audience react as if they were watching a horror transmission. Earth's saltwater crocodile, a predator unchanged for 200 million years, longer than most species in the Union had existed. An ambush killer that could drag a full-grown Durrani equivalent animal underwater and death-roll it into pieces. Earth's box jellyfish, a creature so simple it did not even have a brain, yet it carried venom in its tentacles that attacked the heart and nervous system simultaneously and could kill a large mammal in under 4 minutes. Earth's parasitoid wasps, insects that laid their eggs inside the living bodies of other creatures so that their young could eat the host from the inside out, while keeping it alive as long as possible. Earth's army ants, swarms of millions that could strip an entire ecosystem bare, and that even large predators fled from. The audience watched in mounting horror as the screen filled with creature after creature after creature, each one more nightmarish than the last, and the cumulative picture that emerged was something that no one in the Galactic Union had ever considered. Earth was not a Category 12 world. Earth was a death world. A planet where evolution had been locked in an arms race so savage and so relentless for so long that it had produced an ecosystem of pure biological warfare, where everything was trying to eat everything else, and everything had developed increasingly insane methods of survival. And somewhere in the upper tier of the audience, the Durrani military attaché stood up again and asked the question that every single being in the hall was thinking. If this is what lives alongside the humans, he said, his deep voice carrying across the silent amphitheater, then what exactly are the humans? Ulan pulled up one final file. Species, Homo sapiens, Earth, Sol 3, revised classification, pending review. Humans, Ulan read, are persistence predators. They do not outrun their prey, because virtually every large animal on Earth is faster than them over short distances. Instead, Humans pursue their prey at moderate speed for hours, sometimes days, using their unique physiology, which includes an unmatched endurance capacity, and a cooling system based on fluid excretion through the skin that allows them to regulate body temperature during extended physical exertion. They chase their prey, Ulan said, until it collapses from exhaustion and overheating, and then they kill it. The silence was absolute. Human bones heal after breaking, their skin closes over wounds, documented continuing to fight and function after injuries that would incapacitate or kill most known species. Their chemical response to danger includes a hormone called adrenaline that temporarily increases their strength and speed and suppresses their ability to feel pain. They are also, Ulan added, the only species on their world that actively seeks out and bonds with the most dangerous creatures on their planet, not through domination and not through psychic control, but through what they call affection and trust, and what our analysts can only describe as mutual recognition between apex organisms. They keep the wolves as family, Ulan said quietly. They ride the horses into battle. They bond with birds of prey and hunt alongside them. And yes, they bond with the honey badger. On the stage below, something moved. During the entire presentation, Sargent had gotten bored of sitting and had wandered across the stage toward the containment area where the other companion animals were being held. Chicked Silkweaver, the enormous spider that had dissolved a drone in 30 seconds, was resting in its containment field near the stage edge. Sargent waddled up to it. The Silkweaver, a predator that had never hesitated in its 7 years of life, saw the small creature approaching and did something that no one in the audience expected. It backed away. It pressed itself against the far wall of its containment area, and it raised its front legs in the universal posture of a creature that did not want to fight. Every Vraxil in the audience made a sound of shock. Chicked's mandibles hung open and stayed open. Sargent sniffed the Silkweaver once, decided it was boring, and waddled back to Kira with the same rolling, unbothered gait he had when he arrived. He sat down beside her and yawned. Kira looked out at the audience, at the 1,000 frozen faces staring at her from the tiered seats of the hall. Grand hall, diplomats and generals and professors and students who had laughed at her and mocked her and called her a soft thing from a nothing world. She knelt down and scratched Sargent behind his ears, and he leaned into her hand, because despite being nature's most fearless creature, he was also very fond of ear scratches. "On Earth," Kira said, and her voice was calm and carried perfectly, "we have a saying about honey badgers." She looked up at the room. Honey badger does not care. And somewhere in the back row of the audience, Elena Vasquez wiped her eyes and smiled so wide it hurt. The morning after presentation day, the academy was a different place. Kira walked into classroom 7 Gamma at her usual time and sat at her usual seat in the back corner next to the waste recycler vent, and opened her datapad and waited for class to begin, the same way she had done every day since she arrived. But nothing else was the same. The corridor whispers had stopped. The casual cruelties had stopped. The laughter and the mandible clicking and the bioluminescent mockery had all stopped, as if someone had reached into the collective consciousness of the student body and turned off a switch. And it was not because they were afraid of Sargent, although they were absolutely afraid of Sargent. It was because of what Sargent represented. The entire academy had watched a tiny creature face down a Silkweaver without flinching, and they had seen the classified files, and they had heard the data, and they had looked at the small, soft-skinned girl, standing alone on that stage, and they had finally understood something that should have been obvious from the very beginning. Kira Vasquez was not soft. She came from a world that had spent 4 billion years trying to kill everything on it, and she was what survived. The first one to approach her was Chicked. It happened 3 days after the presentation, in the corridor outside the dining hall. the same corridor where Chict had mocked her and asked her what fluffy creature she would bring. Chict approached slowly and carefully, in the way that Vraxel moved when they were uncertain, legs clicking softly against the floor, mandibles held close together in the posture of someone who did not want to appear threatening. Kira watched the Vraxel student approach, and she did not smile, and she did not frown, and she simply waited. "I wanted to ask you something," Chict said, and the translator rendered the words in a tone that Kira had never heard from Chict before, a tone that was quiet and genuine and completely stripped of mockery. "How do you do it?" Chict asked. "How do your people bond with creatures like that without being killed? My Silkweaver was bred in captivity for 6 generations, and bonded to my family line through genetic imprinting and chemical conditioning. Your creature was wild. I could see it in the way it moved. It chose to be there. How?" Kira thought about it for a moment. "I think," she said, "it is because we are the same kind of stubborn." Chict tilted their head in the way that Vraxel did when they were processing something new. "On Earth," Kira continued, "the honey badger does not back down from anything. It does not care how big you are or how dangerous you are. It just keeps going. And humans are like that too. We are not the fastest or the strongest, but we just keep going. And I think the honey badger recognizes that. It is mutual respect," Kira said, "that refuse to quit." Chict was silent for a long time, and then the Vraxel student said something that surprised Kira more than anything that had happened since she arrived at the academy. "I think," Chict said slowly, "that I have been a fool." Kira looked at Chict, and for the first time she saw not the bully who had tormented her for weeks, but a kid, just a kid from another world, who had been raised to believe that strength was the only thing that mattered, and who was now realizing that strength came in forms that could not be measured on a union classification scale. "You were not great to me," Kira said honestly, "but I have been the new kid before. I know how it works." "I would like to learn more," Chict said, "about your world and your creatures, if you are willing to teach me." Kira nodded. "I would like that." And just like that, a friendship began between a human and a Vraxel, 2 species that the galaxy had never imagined would find common ground. 2 children who had more in common than either of them had realized, because they were both young and far from home, and trying to prove themselves in a universe that was much bigger and more complicated than anyone had told them it would be. Gorath came next. The massive Dorani student found Kira in the academy garden a week after the presentation, and what happened was so extraordinary that the other students who witnessed it would talk about it for years. Gorath lowered himself to the ground in front of Kira. He pressed his enormous scaled head to the floor until his eyes were below hers, and he stayed there. In Dorani culture, this was the highest honor one warrior could give to another, the lowering of the head, the acknowledgement that the other being had earned something that rank and size and brute force could not buy. "Your world forged you in war," Gorath said, his deep voice vibrating through the garden floor. "Seen it." Kira shook her head. "Not war," she said. "Survival. There is a difference." Gorath raised his head and looked at her, and she could see something shifting behind his golden reptilian eyes. A recalculation. A new understanding. "What is the difference?" he asked. "War is when you fight to destroy," Kira said. "Survival is when you fight to live. Everything on Earth fights to live. The honey badger fights to live, the lion fights to live, the cobra and the crocodile and the whale and the ant, they all fight to live, and so do we. We did not climb to the top because we wanted to conquer. We climbed because we refused to die." Gorath was quiet for a long time. "I think," he said finally, "that your species will surprise this galaxy many more times before they are done." Kira smiled. "Probably," she said. The weeks that followed brought changes that rippled far beyond the academy walls. The reclassification of Earth's fauna, triggered a full review at Union military intelligence, and the results sent shockwaves through the diplomatic community. Earth's oceans alone contained more apex predators than most entire planets combined. And the deep ocean files were so disturbing that 3 separate intelligence analysts requested transfers to less stressful departments after reviewing them. This human delegation, which had previously been assigned the smallest offices and the worst meeting times in the Union diplomatic complex, suddenly found itself being treated with a very different kind of attention. Ambassadors who had ignored Earth's representatives for months were now requesting meetings and cultural exchange programs, and the phrase cultural exchange was Union diplomatic code for "we need to understand these people before they surprise us again." Back at the academy, life settled into something new and strange and wonderful. Kira still sat near the viewport at lunch sometimes, but she was no longer alone. Chick sat with her more often than not, and the Vraxel student had developed a fascination with Earth biology that bordered on obsession, constantly asking questions about everything, from pack-hunting dynamics to the migratory patterns of birds. Gorath joined them sometimes, and his presence guaranteed that nobody else would bother them, because despite the newfound respect for Kira, there were still a few students who needed the reminder of a 3-meter Durrani sitting at her lunch table. Even some of the Thesic students began reaching out, intrigued by the idea that a species without psychic ability could form deep bonds with other creatures through nothing but patience and trust and time. And Sargent became the most famous animal on Station Valar 9. The Academy gave him a special habitat near the garden level, and students from every cohort made detours to watch him through the observation window, and every single time he was doing exactly the same thing, whatever he wanted. He ate when he was hungry, and he slept when he was tired, and he explored when he was curious, and if something bothered him, he dealt with it with the same straightforward, fearless attitude that had made his species legendary on a planet full of legends. The plebeian bureaucrat Togwit, who had approved the original transport request, became something of a minor celebrity himself, known as the being who stamped the form that changed the galaxy, which he found both flattering and deeply stressful. Months passed. Kira sat in the academy garden on a warm, artificial afternoon, with Sargent dozing in her lap. Around her, a dozen students from half a dozen species were scattered across the grass, arguing about homework and sharing snacks from their homeworlds, and complaining about Professor Ulan's latest assignment. Chicht was trying to explain Vraxil silk chemistry to a confused plebeian exchange student, while Gorath was arm wrestling 3 smaller students at once, and losing on purpose, because he had learned that sometimes strength meant knowing when not to use it. Kira scratched Sargent behind his ears, and he made that low rumbling sound that was not quite a purr, but was close enough. And she looked up through the garden's transparent ceiling at the stars that stretched out in every direction, billions of them, each one a sun with worlds spinning around it, and creatures living and dying and fighting to survive on every single one. She thought about Earth. She thought about the blue planet spinning in its little corner of the galaxy, a world so dangerous that the rest of the universe had classified it as a death world, a world where the oceans could crush you, and the deserts could dry you to dust, and the jungles could eat you alive, and the winters could freeze you solid. And she thought about the people of that world, her people, who had looked at all of that, said, "Yes, but have you seen the sunset?" And then tamed wolves, and rode horses, and built cities and crossed oceans, and reached for the stars. They had laughed at her, because she was small and soft and alone. They did not understand. No human was ever truly alone. Humans carried their whole world with them, every creature and every scar, and every lesson written in 4 billion years of extinction and survival and adaptation and stubbornness. And if the galaxy ever needed to learn one thing about humanity, it was this. They did not rise to the top of Earth's food chain because they were the biggest or the fastest or the most venomous, or the most armored. They got there the same way the honey badger got everywhere it wanted to go. They simply refused to stop. Kira smiled and held Sergeant a little closer and watched the stars burn, and she was not afraid of any of them. Not a single one.